and welcome to Bedtime Story. We are reading George Orwell 1984 and we are about to begin chapter 3, which is entitled The Ministry of Truth. And if you remember, our hero is Winston, and Winston is living in a futuristic society where the government, who are called the Party with a capital P, are able to spy on everybody and can observe everything. They have Big Brother, which is a camera everywhere and it's watching you, and they also have telescreens inside your house. So there's no privacy and you're constantly under observation to make sure that you are following the government's demands. Winston, our hero, is working for the Ministry of Truth. Chapter 3. Are you sitting comfortably? Then I shall begin. Winston pulled the speak right towards him and put on his glasses. To the right of the speak right, there was a small hole. To the left, a larger one. In the office wall, there was a third hole, larger than the other two. Now, just to put this into context, speak right is a play with words because the word right is written W-R-I-T-E, as in I'm writing with a pen. But obviously speak right means speak correctly. So it sounds like speak correctly, but it's actually speak and write. So it's some type of machine where you speak and write. Messages came to Winston's office through the smallest hole of the speak right. Newspapers came to him through the middle hole, and the largest hole was for waste paper. Hot air carried that away. These large holes were called memory holes for some reason. Today, 4 messages had come through the smallest hole onto his desk. The messages were about changes to the Times newspaper. For example, in Big Brother's speech in the Times on the 17th of March, he had said that South India was safe. The Eurasians would attack North Africa. That had not happened. The Eurasians had attacked South India, not North Africa. Winston had to rewrite that part of Big Brother's speech so you could read in the Times for the 17th of March that Big Brother had known about the attack before it happened. When Winston had finished his changes to the Times, went with the newspaper down the middle hole. A new edition would soon appear with his changes. Every copy of the old edition would disappear, destroyed. The message to Winston with the changes would disappear down the memory hole, which was the big hole, in order to be burned. Every day, newspapers, magazines, photographs, films, posters and books were all changed. The past was changed. The party was always right. The party had always been right. The records department, where they destroyed all the old copies of everything, was the largest department in the Ministry of Truth. But there was no truth. The new copies were not true, and the old copies had not been true either. The newspapers were not telling the truth. They were telling what the government wanted people to read. For example, the Ministry of Plenty had said they would make 145 million pairs of boots last year. 145 million pairs of boots. But 62 million pairs were made. So Winston changed 145 million to 54 million. So that way the party had made more boots and therefore looked like it was a very good party trying to help people. But it was possible that no boots were made at all, to be perfectly honest. And it was possible that nobody knew or even cared how many boots were being made. You could read in the newspapers that 5 million extra pairs of boots had been made, or you could see that half the people in Oceania didn't have boots. What you read in the newspaper and what you saw on the street were two totally different things. Winston looked around the office. A woman with fine hair spent all day looking for the names of people who had been vaporized. Each of them was, in newspeak, an unperson. She took their names out of every newspaper, book, letter, everything. Her own husband had been vaporized last year, and she took his name out too. People disappeared from the newspapers when they were vaporized, but they could also appear in the newspapers when they didn't exist. Winston remembered Mr. Ogilvy. He had appeared in the newspapers because he had led the sort of life the party wanted. Ogilvy had joined the spies at the age of 6. At the age of 11, he told the thought police that his uncle was a criminal. At the age of 17, he had been an organizer in the Young People's League. At 19, he had invented a new bomb which had killed 31 Eurasians when it was first tried. At 23, Ogilvy had died like a hero fighting the Eurasians. There were no photographs of Ogilvy, but there had been no Ogilvy. Not really. Ogilvy hadn't really existed. The photographs were made at the Ministry of Truth. Ogilvy was part of a past that had never happened. Anything could be changed. A dreamy man with hairy ears called Ampleforth rewrote old poems until they supported everything the party believed in. But all this work, all these changes, were not the main work of the Ministry of Truth. Most workers in the ministry were busy writing everything that people of Oceania read or saw. All the newspapers, films, plays, poems, school books, telescreen programs and songs, the Newspeak dictionaries and the children's spelling books. After his morning's work, Winston went to the canteen. It was full, very noisy, and smelled of cheap food and the gin that was sold from a hole in the wall. "Oh, I was looking for you," said a voice behind Winston. It was Sígueme, his friend, from the dictionary department. Perhaps friend was not exactly the right word. You did not have friends these days, you had comrades. But some comrades were more interesting than others. Sígueme was working on the 11th edition of the Newspeak dictionary. He was a small man, even smaller than Winston, with dark hair and large eyes. They were sad, but they seemed to laugh at you and search your face closely when they talked to you. "Have you got any razor blades?" asked Sígueme. "None," said Winston quickly, perhaps too quickly. "I've looked for them everywhere, can't find them." Everyone was asking for razor blades. There had been none in the party shops for months. There was always something which the party could not make enough of. Sometimes it was buttons, sometimes it was wool, now it was razor blades. "I've been using the same razor blade for 6 weeks. Actually, it was a lie. He really had 2 new ones at home. The people waiting for food and gin moved forward slowly. Winston and Sígueme took dirty plates from the pile. "Did you speak to the party yesterday?" asked Sígueme. "All the Eurasian prisoners. were hanged. "I was working," said Winston. "I'll see it at the cinema." "Oh, it's not so good at the cinema." His eyes looked hard at Winston. It's as if they said, I know you don't like to see the prisoners die. I know you don't." Syme was an enthusiastic supporter of the party's decisions about war, prisoners, thought crime, the deaths in the underground rooms below the Ministry of Love, about everything. Winston always tried to move the conversation away from all of that. Syme knew a lot about newspeak, and when he talked about language, he was interesting. "The prisoners kicked when they were hanged," said Syme. "I always like that. It spoils when their legs are tied together. And one of them had his tongue out. It went all blue. I like that kind of detail, when their legs kick and their tongue comes out when they're being hung. I like that." "Next, please," called the prole who was giving out the food, and Winston and Syme gave their plates. She put some grey meat on each one. There was also some bread, a small piece of cheese, and a cup of sugarless black coffee. "There's a table there under the telly screen," said Syme. "Let's get gin and sit there." The gin was poured for them into big cups, and they walked through the crowd canteen to a metal table. There were some pieces of meat on the table from the person's last meal. They ate in silence. Winston drank down his gin, which brought tears to his eyes. "How's the dictionary?" he said, speaking loudly because of the noise. "I'm on the adjectives," said Syme. "It's wonderful work." His eyes shone. He pushed his plate away, took his bread in one pale hand and his cheese in the other, and put his mouth near Winston's ear so he didn't have to shout. "The 11th edition is the final one," he said. "We're building a new language. When we've finished, people like you will have to learn to speak again. You think the main job is inventing new words, don't you? Wrong, wrong. We're destroying words, lots of them, hundreds of them every day. We destroy words. We're only leaving the really necessary ones, the ones that are absolutely necessary, and they'll stay in use for a long time." He ate his bread hungrily. His thin, dark face had come alive, and his eyes were shining like the eyes of a man in love. "It's a beautiful thing to destroy words," he said. "For example, a word like good. If you have good in the language, you don't need bad. You can say ungood." Winston smiled. It was safer not to say anything. Syme continued. "Do you understand? The aim of newspeak is to narrow thought. In the end, we will make thought crime impossible. Absolutely impossible, because people won't have the vocabulary. They won't have the words to think the crime. By the year 2050, there will be nobody alive who can understand the conversation we're having now." "Except," Winston began, but then stopped. He wanted to say, "except the proles." But he was not sure if the party would accept the thought. Syme had guessed what he was going to say. The proles are not real people," he said. "By 2050, earlier probably, you won't need a slogan like 'freedom is slavery.' The word freedom won't exist." So the whole idea of freedom won't exist either. If the word doesn't exist, the idea doesn't exist. The good party member won't have any ideas. If you're a good party member, you won't need to think. One of these days, thought Winston, Sígueme will be vaporized. He's too intelligent. He sees too clearly and speaks too openly. He goes to the Chestnut Tree Cafe where the painters and the musicians go and where Goldstein himself used to go. The party doesn't like people like that. One day he will disappear. It's written on his face. Sígueme looked up. "Here comes Parsons," he said. You could hear his opinion of Parsons in his voice. He thought Parsons was a fool. Winston's neighbour from Victory Mansions was coming towards him. He was a fat, middle-sized man with fair hair and an ugly face. He looked like a little boy in man's clothing. Winston imagined him wearing not his blue party overalls, but the uniform of the spies. Parsons shouted, "Hello, hello," happily, and sat down at the table. He smelled of sweat. Oof. Sígueme took a piece of paper from his pocket with a list of words on it and studied the words with an ink pencil between his fingers. "Look at him, working in the lunch hour," said Parsons. "What have you got there, old boy? Something a bit too clever for me, I expect. Smith, old boy, I'll tell you why I'm chasing you. It's the money you forgot to give me." "What money?" "What money?" said Sígueme. "What money?" said Winston, feeling for money in his pocket. About a quarter of your earnings were paid back to the party in different ways. "The money for Hate Week. You know I collect money for Victory Mansions and we're going to have the best flags around. $2 you promised me." Winston found 2 dirty dollar notes and gave them to Parsons. Parsons wrote $2 very carefully in small letters next to Winston's name in a little notebook. It was clear that he nearly never read or wrote. "Oh, Smith, old boy," he said, "I hear that son of mine threw stones at you yesterday. I talked to him about it. He won't do it again, believe me." "Yes, well, that shows what good children they are, doesn't it? Both of them. They only think about the spies. And the war, of course. Do you know that my girl did last week? She was on a walk in the country with the spies and she saw a strange man. She and 2 other girls followed him and then they told the police about him." "What did they do that for?" Winston asked, shocked. "They thought he was a Eurasian spy," said Parsons. "They noticed his shoes were different." Winston looked at the dirty canteen, looked at all the ugly people in their ugly overalls, eating ugly, terrible food, and he listened to the telescreen. A voice from the Ministry of Plenty was saying that they were all going to eat more chocolate, 20 grams a week. Was he the only one who remembered that last week they got 30 grams? They were getting less chocolate, not more. But Parsons wouldn't remember that, and even a clever man like Sígueme found a way to believe what he was being told. Winston came out of his sad dream. The girl with dark hair who he remembered from the 2 minutes hate was at the next table. She was looking at him, but when he looked back at her, she looked away. Winston was suddenly afraid. Why was she watching him? Was she following him? Perhaps she was not the thought police, but party members could be even more dangerous than spies. How had he looked with the telescreen voice told them about the chocolate? It was too dangerous to look disbelieving. There was even a word for it in newspeak. Face crime, it was called. Face crime. The girl had turned her back on him again. At that moment, the telescreen told them all to return to work, and the 3 men jumped to their feet and went off. So, that was the end of chapter 3. So make sure that you listen in for the next one, chapter 4, which is entitled Own Life. Have a wonderful evening. Good night. Sweet dreams.